My name is Heather Crowley. I do not work for the city, but I work for the county, and I have been collaborating with the city a great deal, particularly with regard to a lot of the violence and activity that's been happening just due to the nature of the program that I run. So I'm happy to be here to help facilitate this panel and discuss what's been going on and what is part of the plan for the future. So today's panel, of course, Mayor Soglin. We have Deputy Mayor Gloria Reyes, Dion Carruthers with the Community Development Division for the city, Zandra Hagberg from the Focused Interruption Coalition, Captain Jim Wheeler from the Police Department, and Jerome Dillard from the Focused Interruption Coalition. So what we're going to do this morning is I have two questions that we're going to present to the panelists, and then we're going to have some question and answer time after they have a chance to respond to those questions. And then we're going to break up in small groups, and I'm going to present some questions to the audience about neighborhoods, responses, things you'd like to see, and then we'll get back together again after that, and we'll have a few of the groups speak out to what they discussed in their small groups. So first, the first question, how has the city responded to the increased violence in our community this spring and summer? And we'll start with Mayor Soglin and move down the table.
This will be my first and last. This will be my first and last words on the subject because I've got to circulate among all the groups here, and I've already spoken about this. How is the city responding? So what we probably think about is violence on the street and physically what we're doing. If you come into the mayor's office and come down the hallway, there are two conference rooms that are kind of L-shaped and a connecting door between the two of them. One of those is my office, and the other one is a conference room that's used for meetings. This group, and what you've got up here, is about 1/3 of the folks who would come into that second conference room. Sometimes it would be once a week, sometimes it would be every few weeks. These are the folks who designed our response. And what I just want to talk about for a few minutes is the process and the folks who were engaged. They're the ones who did it, in effect, behind closed doors. They sat there, they defined their objective, what their goals were, and then if you were to go into that room, and occasionally I would drop in, sometimes for 2 minutes, sometimes for 10 minutes, and just plop down and just sit there and listen to their engagement. There were charts all over the room. It was like somebody was designing a bridge. There was engagement from folks who work for the city, the county, most importantly, people who are citizens of this community. And what is important about the engagement and what they were involved in terms of design is not just the specific assignment they had, which was to develop what was called the rapid response in terms of the shootings we were encountering. But what they developed was a system of thought and analysis which I believe is going to be applicable way beyond the specific initial task. There are two main programs that are recognized in this country in terms of dealing with violence as a public health issue. One is referred to as the Cardiff model, and the other is referred to as the Cure Violence model. I've now had the opportunity to examine both of them. And very frankly, I find flaws in them. The Cure Violence model does have a data collection element, which I think is very important. But to get to the heart of it, I believe that the system, the response that was designed in how we show up after a shooting to work with the victim's family and friends, the witnesses' families and friends, is going to be applicable on a day-to-day basis without waiting for the shooting. In other words, it's what we ought to be out there doing on a day-to-day basis, and is going to be more effective than these two nationally recognized programs, the Cardiff model and the Cure Violence model. And that's why we're going to put in 2 staff positions in the public health budget next year to start developing our own initiative. And that's why we're going to be putting in several $100,000 more on top of what we funded in 17 for 2018 to expand this. I'm just very thankful for the time and the effort that was put in, which dates back to last January or February, and is an ongoing response, which is working, I think, very successfully. So thank you to all of you.
Gloria?
So as the mayor shared with you, as we started spring, come February and March, we were seeing rapidly the increase in shots fired in our city and up in homicide. So the mayor really wanted to come up with some rapid response strategies of how we are going to quickly deal with this issue. Now, we had to challenge ourselves. So we brought the team together, Dane County. We brought in some people from the neighborhood, Focused Interruption Coalition, Will Green, and Anthony Cooper from Nehemiah, and also partnered with other city folks in the county. And it was a challenge for us to come up with something quickly. We really wanted to go towards long-term strategies. That's where we wanted to go to, education, employment, and so forth. But we realized that we needed to do something right away. So the group discussed some of these challenges and how we're going to respond. We ultimately, we went through a strategic doing process, and we ultimately decided that under the assumption that there are a small portion of people in our community who are responsible for the majority of our crime. And we really wanted to wrap ourselves around those individuals and families who were faced with trauma, who have, who we see on a daily basis, or who are on the peripheral of these investigations and these shots fired. So that's ultimately how we wanted to do it. And then also work with them, boots on the ground. Work with our current community organizations that the city and the county funds, and wrap ourselves around them, as I mentioned. So boots on the ground. Let's get at them before the incident happens. Figure out what's going on in their families, and that was where we were going to go. Unfortunately, we were falling behind. The shots fired just kept coming. It was a challenge to keep up. We really wanted to be preventative and proactive, and that just wasn't happening. So what we did do was, after an incident happened, we responded to the incident using our Focused Interruption Coalition partners and city folks to figure out, after an incident happens, an attempt to interrupt any future violence. So that is what, after numerous meetings, we met once a week. Every Tuesday afternoon, we spent time together talking about the incidents that were happening, evaluating why they were happening, who was involved. And there were a few incidents where we really were, the Focused Interruption Coalition partnership was invaluable. They were able to come in and interrupt retaliation efforts that we knew of that was happening. And so we did that, and we also looked at, as we were moving through this work, we also figured out, as the mayor had discussed, is the public health perspective, right? We wanted to really look at long-term strategies, and public health just kept coming up. That is what we are going to be doing in the future. And it looks like Nancy is cutting me off, so I'm going to take it to Dion.
And we will be addressing the future plans in our next question.
You want me to go to the next question or this?
No, you can go ahead.
Part of my role with the Community Development Division and also my coworker Nancy Saiz on the rapid response team was to also give a lens for the from our department on how we help to put together proposals and funding for community outreach for nonprofits and other agencies to apply for to help address these other needs, because one organization cannot help with all these incidents. So we also took this as an opportunity for us to get feedback and learn from this rapid response this summer, as the mayor and Common Council has allotted some money to our department to come up with programming to come out this past summer and also this fall around peer support, also youth and adult employment. And in this upcoming year, we have a community building engagement and also emerging opportunity grant funding that we're putting together to help also put more resources out into the community through organizations to help address, from, as the mayor mentioned earlier, employment, mental illness, housing, and et cetera. We do also in our department, the community development, the city has also have other fundings in two targeted areas where they partner. One with Commonwealth on the southwest side, and it's called the Burn Grant, and that's kind of a partnership through the police department with Commonwealth. And then we have a north side called Safe and Thriving Grant that we is also running out of our office through two of my other co-workers, Mary O'Donnell and Allison Dungan. They have a focus on the north side where they've hired community residents, 7 they call navigators that are working within the community. Both of these programs right now are currently in the planning stage. On the north side, Safe and Thriving, they were granted $750,000 to implement resources and programming in that area. So being a part of this rapid response and also having Focus Interruption apply this summer and take $75,000 and use it towards the violence and crimes intervention and support of victims this summer is a learning process that the city was taking on. Also, it was helping myself and my department in community development help better put out better programs and also funding for programs to help the community.
Thank you. For the Focused Interruption members, if you could just give a brief description, I think that would be help of the coalition and kind of who your members are and how you came together, and then what role you've played this year in terms of helping with the violence.
Absolutely. Am I on? Hello?
Yeah, get closer.
Okay. Is there? It doesn't sound loud. Okay, here I am. My name is Zandra. I'm with the Focused Interruption Coalition. I'm the assistant director. Jerome Dillard is also part of the Focused Interruption Coalition. He is our director of reentry services. Anthony Cooper, who is the director of reentry for Nehemiah, is our executive director. And we also have 6 other members that provide peer support. We came about 2 years ago to drive the 15-point plan for the city of Madison. And one of the questions posed was, what were the things that needed to be addressed immediately? And that was the need for peer support. So you'll hear a lot about peer support and trauma-informed care. Peer support is, you cannot replicate experience with textbooks. So the importance of the message, as you heard the mayor say earlier, is the person that delivers it. And so over the course of 2 years, we came together, the coalition was formed, and our mission is to be the frontline interrupters of violence, racial disparities, mass incarcerations, and injustices primarily in impoverished communities. So anything dealing with those issues, we kind of try to be the forefront to support and lead the injustices. Or not lead the injustices, but counteract them, sorry. And in terms of our role, we're part of the rapid response team, and out of that came the need for crisis response. It was a collective idea among the entire team, and Focused Interruption Coalition said that they would take on those. We already had the relationships in the community to kind of deal with the individuals. We are a grassroots organization, those boots on the ground, and having the partnership with the Madison Police Department, the UW Hospital and Clinics, we have responded to for the most part, every shooting, stabbing, and homicide that's happened over the summer. And for the first couple months, it was really, okay. For the first couple months, we were probably responding to something 3 times a week, 2 to 3 times. And for the past month or so, it has definitely been effective. It has calmed down. There's still some shots fired calls, but we don't respond to shot fires. It's really, the purpose is to go and assist the victim and their families and try to interrupt that, the trauma and the effects of that violent incident will have on the families and victims.
Thank you. Captain Wheeler?
Hi, Captain Wheeler. I'm actually command the community outreach section, and my role on the violence prevention team was basically to provide information or share information, and also to be a liaison and facilitate tasks that needed to be done when we would have violence in the city. One thing that I pointed out when I joined the team, and I kind of made it clear to all the members, I said, this is the community, attacking the violence. I'm just there, the lone police officer, to do what I just said, just to provide, share information, and also to try to facilitate tasks. But on a bigger scale, what the Madison Police Department did, we had our violence reduction initiative. And what we did, we have 3 analysts that are able to look at our data. And like Deputy Mayor Reyes was saying, there's only a few people, when you look at crime trends, that really commit the greatest numbers of crimes. So when we had our analysts look at the data, there seemed to be a connection between certain people being at the same shooting situations all the time. So to us, that was a clue that maybe they're involved. They may not have been the shooter, but they may have been associated with people who were the shooters. So we identified those individuals. We did extensive background checks, and we looked at, whether we could arrest them on other charges. We went out into the community, and we made contact even with those individuals to let them know that we know you're involved in this somehow. We may not be able to arrest you now, but please stop the violence. It's not good for the community. As part of that also, we made contacts with many members of the community, handing out pamphlets. And I have some stats here of what we did. We did 60 operations within the city. Each one had an after-action report because they were required to list the activities that each operation was conducted. We had 1,900 contacts, 900 pamphlets were distributed. We had 45 arrests, 36 citations, 87 warnings. Attempted homicide, we made an arrest for that. Also made arrests for recklessly endangering safety, weapon offenses, armed robbery, multiple drug trafficking arrests, bail jumping, drunk driving, and domestic abuse charges. We're hopefully that, as you can see, that has calmed down the violence. But I wouldn't just add, we got to keep on top of this. And one thing I think we need is, with this group coming out, that after the police come in and kind of calm things down a lot, we do need others to come behind us and to rebuild the neighborhood and to find those people who are going to be leaders in the neighborhood, give them, empower them to actually, be those leaders and just keep the violence down, because it is a community partnership that we really need. And the Focus Interruption Coalition, I can tell you right now, they have been very helpful. There has been one incident that it's probably our biggest incident, was when we had four shooting victims that went to the same hospital, and it got very tense within the waiting room. And the Focus Interruption Coalition did a great job of basically calming things down so that no one else would get hurt. So thank you.
Thank you. Jerome, did you have more to add?
Well, I'll just say something briefly here. First of all, I want to commend the city for convening the rapid response team. It's something like I've never seen before here in Madison, when you have county, city, police, nonprofits, faith-based, grassroots organizations coming together to look at solutions to a real issue that was spiraling out of control in our community a couple of months back. Being a member of the Focus Interruption Coalition and being a responder to many of the incidents in the community, I just felt that we're really on to something when we're welcomed by law enforcement, when we're recognized in the hospital, when we come in to check on victims, and how law enforcement engage us in the hospital and make sure that we will have access. It's something that's different. Generally, you can't cross those lines when there's an investigation going on, but they've really worked with us and really made it very helpful for us to do what we do. In responding to these families, I realize more than anything that chronic stress and chronic traumas are real attributes to some of the things that individuals are acting out in our communities. And oftentimes, we're working with a community that's distrusting to people who do not look like them. I've had bad experiences with corrections, law enforcement, and there's a roadblock there that says, I got to shut down when they come around. And I feel that peer support for individuals, because the mayor couldn't have said it better when he said violence is a public health issue. What we're dealing with is chronic stress and chronic traumas in certain communities. And it's going to take those who have overcome those traumas, those who have lived through those stressful situations and come out on the other end, to be able to reach in and reach out to these individuals and hold their hand and say, listen, we can do this. And there's no doubt in my mind that as a community, as a whole community, we can address the violence and really bring it down to nil, working together, but treating it as a health care issue.
Thank you. So for the second part of this, you've already started to touch on this, and I'm going to start with Dion for this question. What strategies is the city currently working on to decrease violence?
As I kind of mentioned earlier, we've put together, right now we're reviewing proposals on peer support, what Mr. Diller was just referring to. That is one start, and I touched a little bit on the Safe and Thriving, which is focused on the north side. And as far as the other one with the burn grant, I'll have Justice speak a little bit on that from Commonwealth, on what they're doing as far as the southwest side when it comes to that. The north side is geared towards helping to prevent enhancing violence and crime in that targeted area. That's a big focus. So they're bringing in other resources and expanding resources that are currently there to make sure we're tapping into the households, not just youth and adults, but the entire household. So I can refer that to Justice now if you want to talk about the burn grant.
Yeah, good morning. Burn grant is fundamentally was an idea from a few years ago for the Department of Justice to take money that was allocated that was going to be earmarked for local police departments and use it for community development that was not focused solely Scott, the Commonwealth is a little bit bigger than the Bergen area, but in general, we're looking at High Point Drive on the west, to Allied Drive on the east, the Delmar, and then Roma on the north-south.
Thank you.
Gloria or Jim, did you have anything else from the city side that you wanted to share?
Sure, just to expand on what Mayor Paul Soglin mentioned as far as looking at violence through a public health lens, we will have two positions within public health. One will be a coordinator position that will coordinate our efforts, the rapid response efforts, and also all the other efforts that are happening in our community. And then the other individual will be a data analyst. The idea there is to really look at the data, look at hospital data, look at fire data, look at police data, and bring it together and really just target our efforts, right? Have the data inform our work. And that's something what we'll be doing starting early, once those positions get started around February, March, hopefully. So yeah, I think that's it. And a lot of just great opportunities out there. We are currently looking at a Bloomberg grant where it's really, I think it's a good opportunity if the city is selected, but it is focused on just violence prevention. So we are looking at different options and all the great things that are happening out in our community. I think what Mayor Paul Soglin has talked about is, his placemaking proposal and really getting community involved in taking ownership of their neighborhoods. And that is what it's going to take to move us forward. I think law enforcement does play a critical role in this, but they cannot do this alone. And we really need our community and our community organizations and stakeholders to really step up on this and really get involved in their own neighborhoods. So that's what we see in the future.
I'm gonna follow up on what I was starting to say earlier, and I've got a few things in there. With the peer support, there's two models a part of that, and one is a crisis focus, and the other one is a reentry. So we're trying to address those needs as well as with working with organizations with funding for those, which is from the age range of 16 to 35 years old. And I mentioned earlier the community building engagement and the emerging opportunity grants are going to be available this upcoming year. Those are also other fundings the city is helping to work with organizations and nonprofits to address a lot of these needs that are in certain communities. And those will be citywide, not just certain neighborhoods.
As far as the police department is concerned, every initiative must come to an end. I mean, you just can't sustain something like that. But we will continue to work, with our partners within the community. We will still do the same things we do every day, try to do as much as engagement as we can do. And, one of the things that we'll be doing next is solidifying our relationship with Focus Interruption Rapid Response team in order to, just freshen it up a little bit, make it a little bit more solid so that we can sustain it more into the future.
So now would be our time for questions. If the audience has questions, we have a few minutes. We're running a little behind, but I want to make sure that this important topic is heard and spoke to. Oh, yeah. If you could use the microphones.
There's one right behind you.
Chuck Colson won the Malcolm Baldrige Award and was presented with it at the Westminster Abbey in London. And Prince Charles asked him, what can be done about the youth crime? Chuck Colson says a very simple answer. In the 30s and 40s and 50s, Sunday school attendance in London was extremely high. When Sunday school attendance went down, crime went up. I'm wondering if there's something that we can do that is politically correct. There's a church, a synagogue, a mosque, all over this city. Is there something we can do to get kids to Sunday school? Because I firmly believe that Sunday school, when kids are young, will cut our crime rate.
I mean, I think our faith communities play a critical role in solving this issue, and we need to really engage them better. And there are many different ways other cities our faith communities are stepping up and being a part of this solution. So definitely, I would be willing to talk to you about how we can include faith communities in this. But it's been very successful in other cities, and I think we really need to go that route. It's very important. Our African-American community and our Latino community, they play a critical role in those cultures, so we definitely need to do that.
Jerome?
Well, a great point that you brought, but I want to reflect back on something the mayor said about taking young men to Birmingham, and these young men seeing African American owned businesses. I think part of the issue, part of the problem that we're dealing with, not to say that the church don't play a vital role, but our kids aren't getting exposure. They're not getting exposure to different parts of the world, different communities, occupations, or even African American owned businesses. And that was speaking to a young man who was caught up in the spirals of selling drugs and everything, and just having a heart-to-heart with this young man. That's something that he pointed out. We don't own nothing in our community. No gas stations, no stores, no nothing. What am I supposed to do? I got a felony at 17 when I couldn't go back to my mother's house to live because of that felony. And so now it's survival. And I took that to heart, but I want to say that many of our kids don't even feel that they're part of America. Many of our children in the African-American community are being tagged with felonies at 17, 18 years old, losing the right to vote, being opted out of so many occupations until it's narrowed down to minimum wage, tough labor jobs, and we're saying, get your act together. Criminologists and sociologists alike says when unemployment is up, crime goes up. When unemployment comes down, crime go down. We need to get these our young people prepared for living wage jobs that they can raise a family on, like my folks did, who worked in the steel mills and factories with no education, but was still able to earn a living wage, had benefits that we can go to the doctors and things. And I'm going to cut it short. I don't want to get too long-winded.
Thank you. If I could just piggyback on something that Jerome said that really hits home with me, and that's the exposure part of it. And I command a unit called CORE, Community Outreach and Resource Education, and we deal with a lot of middle school kids. And some of the things that we do, we have a program called See It to Be It. And we take kids out in the middle school age groups to the airport, to hospitals, to MG&E, just to let them know that there's other things out there that you can be. You see it, you can be it. And we find that to see the kids, you know, with smiles on their faces going, I didn't know I could do this. You talk to a lot of kids today, they're just like this. They don't think there's anything out there in the world for them, like good paying jobs or anything else that they can aspire to. So we need more of that, like Jerome was saying, getting people exposed. So, you know, I'll make a plug for those in the community. You know, when people say, how can I help? I mean, if you have a business or something like that where you want kids to see it or expose kids to those types of things, you know, you can let us know. Captain Jim Wheeler, Community Outreach, I'm on the internet. So that would be very helpful.
Thank you. Question over here.
Mic on. So when you're looking at violence as a public health issue, which I think is a great approach, are we going to the younger ages and looking at child abuse and neglect? Absolutely. Because in so many counties, what they're finding is that kids that are in the JJ system had 2 or 3 incidences with Child Protective Services. I know that's a county service, but as a city and probably the bigger user of Dane County CPS, what are we doing to strengthen those families? And the CDC has a great publication, a technical guide on child abuse and neglect that includes that economic stressor that is happening in those households. Because if mom and dad are making a living wage, they're less likely to neglect their children. So what's the city doing at that younger age?
Yeah, that's an excellent point. I mean, I think the benefit that we have is that our public health department is a city-county department. So we will have access to all that data. And we definitely need to look into early childhood trauma and how that impacts an individual moving forward, and how do we really be preventative. And that is something that we'll look into. I think the data will tell us that. When we look at the data, we already know that, but I think the data will tell us that and figure out and guide us on where we need to go.
Thank you. Anyone else?
Well, I don't want to talk. Thank you for your question, because those are facts that we're just starting to look at with the trauma-informed care in the last 10 years. But the ACEs are real. Adverse childhood experiences are real, and we need to get into that before they turn into traumas. Well, we can say spend more time with your kids and this and that, but when you're in chronic stress, just worrying about how the rent's going to be paid or what am I going to feed them tonight, that stress is transferable. We feel it, we see it, and so you're living in a household where it's chronic, and if it goes unaddressed, it develops into traumas, and so your point is right on the nail. It really is. And looking at it from a healthcare lens, with trauma-informed care, and really looking at the ACEs of our children, can cut off some of the generational stuff that we're dealing with right now. We're dealing with generations of trauma with individuals in certain communities.
So I realize we have more people waiting to ask questions. I also want to provide the audience time to get into small groups and start discussions about this. And our plan was to have the panelists be present in the audience so they're able to answer questions and provide input when you do break up into small groups. So hopefully that'll give you a chance to get your questions answered. So if people could break up into groups of 5, and then I will share with you the questions we'd like you to address as a small group. Okay, so the 4 questions that we'd like you to address as a group. The first one is, what makes you feel part of your community? The second is, what barriers do you see that keep people from being part of the community? What can you or your neighbors do to address those barriers? And how can local government support residents in building stronger communities? So what you're seeing and experiencing in terms of strengths and barriers, and then how can the city help you? So if you could take about 10 minutes for each question, we're gonna start sharing out about 11:40, 11:45. And if there's one person that wants to take notes for each group, that'd be great. So it's good to see all this sharing happening. I really appreciate that. If we could start wrapping up the conversations and having one person from each group at the respective microphones so we can start sharing out some of the main points that you discussed. Also, there is an evaluation in your folder that if you could fill it out before you leave today, there are boxes at either exit that you can leave them in. And Ileana from the city also has a sign-up sheet. She'll be walking around to the different groups. If you'd like to participate or do some follow-up around this conversation with the city, they'll be in contact with you. So do we have a group that would like to start sharing out some of their information? Great. Do you mind going to the microphone? Thank you.
Is this on?
It is. You could share your first name, please.
Okay, my name is Jim Cortado. I'm the president of the Arbor Hills Neighborhood Association. Our little group also had folks from other neighborhood associations as well. Do you want me to go through all the questions quickly?
Whatever you'd like to highlight would be great.
All right. We came up with a half dozen items for each question, which we'll turn in to you. However, I would like to highlight a few of them. What makes you feel part of the community? And a lot of the recommendations or suggestions were that it involves either somebody reaching out to you or you reaching out to the community so you know your neighbors and are active in various activities. And we have a laundry list of those. Most of them are the fairly obvious ones. Volunteering, being active, feeling safe, and so on. Question number 2, what barriers do you see that keeps you from being part of the community? Lack of gathering space, being shy, too busy, jobs, parenting getting in the way, being a transient. You're only going to live in the neighborhood for a year or two. Remaining ignorant of your neighbors, lack of engagement. Okay. Number 3, what can you and your neighbors do to address these barriers? A lot of it's centered around having community-driven events, and the primary vehicle for driving that are neighborhood associations. But it essentially involves causing people to be invited to participate in activities, and that builds identity, relationships, enhances communications. The 4th question, how can local government support residents in building stronger communities? Essentially 4 ideas. Engage with your public officials, such as council members, and speak up at meetings. Number 2, work with the police and economic development folks and fire departments so that you've got a working relationship. Number 3, have police and fire departments visit schools, not when there's crime or crisis, but just to establish relationships and trust with the students. And number 4, ask for specific help from your community. And ours, for example, we wanted more lights and cameras, and we got them. Okay.
Thank you. Do any of the panelists have any responses to some things that were addressed? No. Okay. Another group that would like to share out some of their ideas?
Okay, I'll try not to touch on anything that was already mentioned, but a lot of things that make our group feel part of the community were activities within our community, such as, you know, ice cream socials or attending our neighborhood association meetings, meeting when there's problems in the area to discuss ways to solve them, frequenting our festivals and markets, frequenting area establishments, meeting owners, getting to know them on a first-name basis, walking about the neighborhood, such as with your dog, to meet your neighbors. That's an excellent way to meet your neighbors. Having opportunities such as this to be able to participate with our city planning, and our alder blogs and outreach and interaction from all of our alders makes us all feel much more part of our community. And there's also many things that are free to everyone in our community that are open to everyone across all socioeconomic barriers, such as Old Botanical Gardens, the zoo. There's a lot of free music, and that makes everyone feel more part of a community. Some of the barriers would again be financial barriers to other things that people can't do, lack of transportation from outlying areas, lack of internet access or computer skills, just the complexity of information sharing about what's available in our community, barriers for direct communication between citizens and city administration, language barriers, lack of translation services, and then a lot of people are working many jobs and have children to raise, and they just have a lack of time to be involved in the community. What can we do to cross those barriers? Reaching out to others. Our group felt very strongly about reaching out, hugging people, knowing your neighbors, knowing what's going on, being there for them when they need you, reaching across racial barriers. If you have neighbors different from yourselves, make sure you reach out to them, volunteer within your community. How can local government support residents? A big big one for our group was addressing mental health and trauma, which has already been brought up, and it sounds like we're already working on that, and we're grateful for that. But it would also be good to get the word out, to perhaps form better partnerships. There's lots of groups out there, and maybe form a wider network, and get the word out to everyone, how to reach out in a time of crisis. Where can survivors go for trauma counseling in an emergency situation? Then we talked about having more after-school programs, teen centers, engaging our youth, all things we've already talked about today. And create, again, I'll just have to say, creating more community awareness of the available emergency services such as mental health services. Thank you.
Thank you. I appreciate you sharing the barriers because I do think it's important to recognize that even today it's a privilege for all of us to be able to be here and that we have access to be able to come here and we don't have to work and we don't have to worry about childcare and we know how to get downtown and we have transportation. So we're missing out, I think, on a big population too in the city that we need to, as neighbors, try and reach out to and make sure that they're included in the conversation also. So this is a good start.
I'm representing the Latina group in the back. And what makes you feel part of the community? We had information about someone coming to Madison and tapping into community services in order to get on her feet and to feel part of the community. So started with Centro Hispano, then got directed to the YWCA and got the housing and legal and just community information that was necessary. So those organizations are really helping. Also schools, whether you're working in the schools, whether you're working with employees of the schools as a parent, or whether you're just, enjoying the camaraderie with other parents, schools seem to be a big uniter. What barriers? Beyond the obvious of language, sometimes it's just implementation. Even though you've requested things to come in Spanish, you end up getting the voicemail in English. So it's just not executed properly. Some teachers go above and beyond and try and work outside of the system and maybe send a special note tagged to the child's clothing instead of just using the email because they realize the parent isn't responding to the email, so they try something different. And that's really a good initiative of teachers. And also, people foreign born, my husband is a perfect example, just doesn't understand how American schools work. And so you go to those parent meetings and they're very quick and West High, you're changing every 10 minutes. He was like, what's this? I'm out of here. And it's just, if you don't have that culture, we went to a private school in the other country. You just don't know where to start. And there's really no one that holds your hand. What can you do to address the barriers? Never stop. Because there's always new people in the pipeline. And so even though it didn't work this year, try it again next year. Even though only 5 new people came, do it again next year. Use radio, use newspaper to get the message out. Nonprofit work is a great opportunity to involve people. And the barriers, transportation is a big barrier, childcare as well. And the last one, what can local governments do? Establish email groups. Sometimes people won't go and participate, but if they could be in a safety watch email group, maybe that's a way to loop them in. The other is find community leaders. I asked them what talents they had before they immigrated here. What were you doing in that other place? Did you run a business, or did you teach, or did you lead a group, or were you involved in politics? And then help them transfer those skills here locally. That's it.
Thank you. Next group. Sure, go ahead.
I'm Irv Bendorf, and I've been in Madison since 1961. And our group, in answering the question of how can neighbors get to know each other better, and I think one of the biggest things that's helped in Arbor Hills is next door. I would like to see the city put these signs. You have these portable signs that you can put message boards on them, encouraging people to get on next door. There's 10 or 20, 30 messages a week, Paul, on our next door. And some have said, well, there's been some arguments or something on it. I haven't seen that in Arbor Hills. Have you, Paul? Very little. So I would like to encourage the city to sponsor these signboards in every neighborhood around the city promoting next door.
Thank you. Does everyone know what next door is? Okay.
I didn't know what it is. Could you explain what it is?
So it's an online service for neighborhoods, so you can sign up for a certain neighborhood, and then people can message if they choose to join the next door. You can get it as an app on your phone or computer. Oh, go ahead.
Lost dog, lost cat.
Lost dog, lost cat, there was a
bicycle
break-in.
stolen,
Yeah,
all kinds of things.
yeah. Questions about where to find resources, or if somebody's selling something in the neighborhood, things like that, babysitters. What's that? Yes, free things on the curb, yeah. Next. Any other groups that would like to share out? Officer Anala?
Hello? Okay. So some of the stuff was repeated, but we felt for what makes you feel a part of your community is the strong schools, and then having those connections with institutions, meaning some of the community organizations, the libraries, schools, neighborhoods, that kind of thing, creating a strong network with those and kind of trying to influence each other with those. Some of the barriers, pretty much what a lot of the other people said, but I think another population that got missed is people that have just been incarcerated and released from jail or have a criminal record. A lot of those people, just because they've made a mistake or have been through their system, cannot get housing or jobs. They can only get a certain amount of certain types of jobs. So I think being able to make a change in that, they can get a sense of pride if they can get housing, have a job where they can make a living instead of minimum wage like that. And then also just some of the psychological effects. Are they being accepted and things like that? Some of the other, let's see, I can't read my writing. Some of the other barriers is some of the programs that we have may not be distributed appropriately, or some of the nonprofits may not be approached, or may not approach people and like more culturally aware, getting the message passed on to people who need it. And then, let's see what else. I don't know if I'm missing anything that you guys think. Some of the things that we can do to address some of these issues is being more culturally aware of the services and some of the barriers. Focus on the children, kind of encourage them to become more civically engaged, make them aware of some of the meetings that are going on, and kind of start showing how they can help with the government. And what else? And then for the government, maybe there's some barriers in possible city government just being more, being able to communicate more, not be as disconnected, engage, and then collaborate to work together, the city and school, doing things together. And then just addressing the trauma for the kids, that's another thing that I think can be addressed, because we do have a lot of issues. Me being a neighborhood officer, I know we touched on it, but I think it's important to touch on it again, that a lot of the children that are going through tough times are experiencing a lot of trauma. Their parents have. There's been some kids that have been going through, have caused some problems and maybe get in trouble, but that if you look at their history, which I've done in some of the kids that I've had contact with, you can see that they've been through a lot of trauma and are not getting the help they need to process it, and I think that's why there's a lot of problems with that. So I think we're looking in the right direction, and I think like the Focus Interrupted group, or coalition, I'm sorry, I think, we respond to shots fired and things like that, but I think what would be another great way to look at it is, and I know there's a lot of technicalities, but to have a group that if a child is going through something traumatic, not necessarily shots fired or domestics, or, just something the parent gets arrested for OWI, things like that, where people can get checked in on. I know we have like victim witness and things like that, but I think it would be cool to have members of the community to be able to do that, to show that not only the law, but like members of the community support you and can assist you in what you need. So that's mine.
Thank you. And I appreciate our neighborhood officers and Officer Anala being here today to participate and really being sincere in her thoughts and conversation. So we have time for one more, and then we'll wrap up.
So I'm not going to answer your questions particularly because you said something a few minutes ago that really meant something to me, and that is that we have a huge group of people that live in Madison that aren't here today. And so this question for me is more to our panelists who represent greater number of our absent neighbors. What makes you feel part of our community? Please, what is it? Because we're answering from, look at us, white Madisonians. What is it? Please tell us, what is it that makes you feel part of our community? Is there anything that we're doing right? Are any of these answers things that really mean something to you? And I mean, the gentleman that's sitting next to Gloria is particularly the person I would like to hear from, because I think he is involved in the North Side, which is where I live. Okay. And we have this segment of the North Side that I feel are disconnected and they need help. And we need to get involved somehow to make it work.
Well, for myself, I can't speak for everyone. I moved to Madison in '91, so I've been here a long time, originally from Chicago. Feeling part of the community for me is me getting myself involved. I've been working, and I also do a lot of volunteer work on my own, which gets me involved with working in the community. I was a part of the group earlier over there, and I was telling them about my experience of being a part of my neighborhood. I really don't feel a part of my neighborhood because I'm getting my neighborhood association newsletters every month, but I'm not getting any face-to-face contact with anyone. And in that newsletter, they may have dates of events going on, but I'm not tracking that like that. And all of a sudden, I'll hear a festival or something going on in the park, or I get a knock on the door during the Christmas time, it's Santa Claus. I'm like, oh, I forgot I signed up for that. So I don't feel like I'm not a part of it, but I don't feel like I'm a part of it. And like I said, I'm going to speak for myself. But I do put myself in other communities besides where I live, where I'm more known and greeted on a regular basis all the time, because that's more my volunteer role. Or in my previous life before the city, I used to work in the school district, where I was really enrooted in that school and community of making sure there was a connection, a communication with strong relationships building. So like I said, I can only speak for myself on that part of it, but it's really tough when you don't have access or the ability to really have someone talk to you, to know more about you, and also they share about themselves to you, so you can start a relationship to get to be a part of your community. It has to be a two-way communication. It can't be one. A neighborhood association newsletter is only one-way communicating. You know, we have to have more of a two-way. I come home and it's just sitting on my doorstep. There's no knock on the door, no ringing the bell or anything. So that's just one-way communication. So two-way communication has to be established in order to have a conversation with someone, to know more about them, to make sure they feel a part of what's going on versus just getting the information. So.
Can I just say 3 sentences and address it as an Afro-American female, since you brought up race, but I'm not here for race? What would help me in my community is if the issues, it all goes back to the festivals and the beautiful hotel gatherings. If mental health issues of Stephen Maddox, who did the largest massacre murder right now all over this nation, if that is addressed, and if people were still living, then if you address mental health, then safety will be here, and safety will be in the schools, and safety will be, and people won't commit suicide massively, and then festivals and situations like this can happen. So if mental health issues are addressed in my family and with my friends, and with, I have all colors and all races, then all this other stuff can take place. Because if we keep having mass suicides, and then there's no safety for anyone.
So I think, I just want to add to that. I mean, I think for me, I was raised here. My parents were migrant farm workers. They worked in Watoma, Wisconsin, where I was born. We came here in the early 70s. Grew up in the Darbo neighborhood, Kennedy Heights, Trurex, lived all in the low-income neighborhoods in Madison, and always feeling like an outsider, always. And I think it was intrinsically within me to really try to participate as I got older to the injustices that were occurring in our communities and continue to occur in our communities. I think that, it wasn't until I actually saw people who looked like me, teachers, African-American teachers, Latino counselors. There were barely any in our school district. And it wasn't until I saw professionals in, those roles who looked like me where it really motivated me to do something different. That is the challenge of our kids, is they don't see themselves as anything else but then what the world is telling them that they are. So I think it's important to have that and really, have those culturally appropriate programs and really think about, as you're sending people out into our communities, that you are sending people and you are advancing people to go into the communities who look like the community.
So I want to be able to honor other people to answer this question, because I think it was a good question. I appreciate you asking that. Even though our time is up, if people are willing to stay, we can finish out in the last few minutes. So.
Well, I'll tell you what made me feel like I was part of the community. I returned to this community in 1996 from Wisconsin State Prison. In early 1997, someone knocked on my door. And in answering that call, I met a gentleman who was trying to start a neighborhood association, who didn't take a lot of my time at that time, but we set up a coffee gathering, and I really got a chance to know this man who did not look like me, but had really, really great intentions. And having that one-on-one with him made me feel that I could be a part of something that would have an impact in the community that I was living in, and that was the Burr Oaks community. And so we started that association together. He said, he didn't want to do it alone, and he wanted someone of color on there. And we had a very successful run at forming that neighborhood association. It was a melting pot of many different races, and we got some things done there. And I really realized that, this is what I need as someone who has never experienced that. Who's never been a part of anything positive like that. And I just want to share that because it does take those one-on-ones, and it takes getting to know one another and knocking on doors. It worked for his purpose, because he did get me.
And if I could just add on to that, we really got to work on getting out of our comfort zones. I mean, in order to really make those changes. Because, even within different businesses, groups, whatever, we seem to stay so enclosed and don't share information. We still, we try to stay who we know and everything else like that. And it takes a lot to get out of your comfort zone. But, those are the things that are really going to, I think, small things that are really going to move the community forward.
So,
Gloria, if you want to close us out.
So I'll just close this out here. So just wanted to share our next steps with the Rapid Response Team. We will continue to meet on a weekly basis. We are looking now at long-term strategies on how to reduce violence in our community. This was an opportunity for us to hear from you, and we will continue this work. We are going to be engaging. Our next step is we're going to be going out to our communities and really focus on our public safety conversations, and engaging our alders and participating in those conversations and getting feedback from you that will be part of our long-term strategies and our plan on how to reduce violence in the next 5 to 10 years.
So thank you all for being so sincere in your thoughts about this process. I appreciate all of your feedback. give yourselves a round of applause, please, because this is really important work. Just a reminder to complete your evaluations if you haven't done so, and that there's also a sign-up sheet if you'd like to continue to be involved in the conversation. I think Nancy if you haven't turned in your group notes, please turn them into Ileana or Nancy over on this side.